Pac-12 is the conference that I'm going to be doing. Um, Real exciting year in the Pac-12. I feel like this year, it's a two-team race in both leagues. I feel like, um, if that, maybe a three-team race. A couple surprise teams. I feel like too, at the four spots. So we'll definitely see what happens here. But like I like to do, and start with the bad before we get to the good. Um, you know, get the bad out the way. Arizona is one of the bad this year. I got them going 3-9. Um, it's just a tough year in the Pac-12 this year with the amount of good teams, quality teams: USC, UCLA, Utah, Colorado, Washington, Stanford, Oregon, Washington State, all quality. Oregon State, is making strides to be a bit better. But in Arizona State's always a good team with Graham as the coach. But this year is going to be tough year, I think, for Arizona. Like I said, 3-9. They went 3-9 last year. Very well could be Rich Rod's last season here in Tuscan. Brandon Dawkins is the quarterback, pretty good running quarterback. Led the team in running last year, over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. Nick Wilson is a senior running back, 331 yards on the ground last year. To go at wide receiver, Sean Brown, he's the leading receiver coming back, 29 catches, 521 yards, 3 touchdowns. Losing a couple of their other guys that are good out there, but Cam Dennison, a senior, is another wide receiver to watch out for. And offensive line wise, they're returning 4 starters on the offensive line. Defense. Demetrius Flanagan Flowers, 78 tackles and 2 picks last year. Someone in the secondary. Their secondary is definitely their strong suit of their defense. Dane Kirkshane, another good player, 60 tackles, 2 picks last year. Jarvis McCall, he had a pick last year, 27 tackles. Isaiah Hayes, 38 tackles last year. Their free safety. Jack Whitaker, another player that 35 tackles, 11 passes blocked last season. Defensive line-wise, DeAndre Miller, Parker Zellers are the guys coming back. Real inexperienced at the linebacker positions. So we'll see how this Arizona team does. I think they're going to struggle this year. Definitely, being in the tough conference that they have. Watch out for J.J. Taylor, also at running back. He's another good running back that they have. Let's see here. Yeah, J.J. Taylor. Watch out for him. Arizona State. I got Arizona State at 2-10 on the year. I do have them beating Arizona as one of their wins late in the year. This is when the team could be 4-8. They'd be a little bit better. Have them losing to San Diego State and Texas Tech. I think it's gonna be a tough year for them. The reason I'm losing Texas Tech is they're going into Tech. And they had a barn burner last year with Tech. 68-55 was a good one. I expect another barn burner this year. Defensively, they have a pretty good defensive line. JoJo Wicker, Tayshawn Smallwood, and then Karan Crump, who had 9 sacks last year, 37 tackles. DJ Calhoun, their leading tackler, coming back, 77 tackles, 4.5 sacks. Jamarcus Rhodes, another good player, coming back, 30 tackles last year. He's a senior this year. Marcus Ball, their best player in the secondary, 64 tackles and interception last season. And then offensive side of the ball, you're looking at a quarterback battle this year between Manny Wilkins and Blake Barnett, the transfer from Alabama, and then Brady White. Brady White played a bit last year. They're in real good hands at the running back position. Demario Richards, real good running back. I like Richards better last year than Balaj. Balaj got a lot of hype and attention because of the 7 touchdown game that he had. But he got most of his yards in that game. He got half of his touchdowns on the season in that game. I think this year Demario Richards will show that he's a better back than Balaj. He did gain more yards than Balaj last year, but Balaj did have 14 touchdowns. Balaj is a pretty big dude. I think he's a good prospect for NFL wise. Demario Richards might be a better prospect at like a slot position if you're talking NFL for him. And then wide receiver, I really like N'Keal Harry. I think he's going to be a real good player, real lanky, tall guy. He gets it done up top, 6'4", 220. Three offensive linemen are returning. I like that. But at the same time, I just think this team's going to struggle being in the tough conference that they do play in. And then Colorado is, they're considered fourth place. I really like what Mike McIntyre did last year. I had, that was definitely out of nowhere. I will say, when I watched them play Michigan, I thought that they had some promise. I said, okay, this is not that bad of a team. A good, good games, a good game. They played good in the first half against Michigan, and that was at my first, kind of taking them a bit serious. And then, when they went into Oregon and won by 3, I thought that was huge. At that point, I kind of felt like Oregon was way better than Colorado. They won that. They destroyed Oregon State. They lost a real close game to USC. And then, they won a good amount of games in a row at Stanford, at UCLA, at Arizona. Washington State, Utah, they won all those games. Some of them were close, some of them they handled. Their defense played really good though last year. They had a real veteran defense last year. They only have 3 returning starters on defense. I think that's the real woeful spot here, because that's really what they fell back on last year was the defense. I don't necessarily look at this team to fall back into the ways that they were. They were a 1-11, 4-8, 2-10, 4-9. Team before their 10-4 season last year, and I look at them going 8-4 this year. Not as good as they were last year, but definitely a pretty good season. I think Colorado will be happy with it. Defensively, is, like I said, is where they struggle. Their top 3 guys, Rick Gamboa. He's their linebacker. He had 77 tackles last year, and he also had a pick. Secondary-wise, Afolo Laguda, real good free safety. He had 69 tackles last year, and Ryan Moeller, he kind of was like the fifth guy in the nickel set. He was the 5th guy in the nickel set, and he played a good amount last year. He's a senior this year, 64 tackles a season ago. Isaiah Oliver is another cornerback that they have that's pretty good. And that's really it. Returning on defense, they got a lot of holes. Defensive line is real young. No returning starters on the defensive line. So we'll see about that. Also, young players at the linebackers position. Also, transfer from Washington, Drew Lewis is slated to start. Watch out for him. I'm sure he's a pretty good prospect coming out of Washington. What I do like about this team, though, is the offense. Steven Montez did get to play a majority of the time. I would say a majority of the time, but he got to play a good amount of games last year. And he threw for about 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I think it was a good, in a sense, it was a good introduction to this season. I think it would be a lot harder if Lufau would have played all season last year. Montez not getting any time at all. Philip Lindsay is a monster back. I think he's a top prospect. He's not a huge guy per se. He's only 5'8", but I think he's going to be a good player. He's a senior this year. I think he's going to have a huge year. They've got 4 returning starters on the offensive line. I do like that. And wide receiver, they have one of the best wide receiving cores in the nation, probably the top receiving core in the Pac-12. We're talking about Devin Ross and Shea Fields. And, these are 2 guys that are going to be your 1 and 2s. Beat you deep or, beat you on a route. Devin Ross is the best NFL prospect, or Shea Fields is the best NFL prospect, I feel like. And then, Devin Ross is close afterwards, but I like Shea Fields' ability to go deep a little bit more than Devin Ross's. And Devin Ross is more the possession guy. than Shea, but they're both pretty small. And then Bryce Bobo, you know, he was honestly to me the more speedy guy and the slot type of guy, even though when you're looking at it, he's the guy that's 6'2", but he's just the same amount of weight as Fields and Ross, so he's really not that big of a guy. Bobo, real quick, I think he's going to have a real good year. And then Jay McIntyre, coach's son, you saw him in spurts last year, but when you look at the stats, he did have 33 catches, 412 yards. Lindsey had 53 catches, 493 yards. The running back, so he's a key piece in the receiving game. Bobo 44 catches, 484 yards. Ross 69 catches, 787 yards and 5 TDs, and Shea Ross 56 catches, 883 yards and 9 touchdowns. I got them going 8-4. They've got a lot of tough games, though. I wouldn't be surprised if they're worse than 8-4. I wouldn't see them being a lot better than 8-4. Now, UCLA, I have going 8-4. Jim Moore, in a sense, kind of on a hot seat this year. He really hadn't jumped over the hump. They had a 4-8 season last year. I wouldn't play into it too much because Josh Rosen did get hurt. But I will say, after they lost that first game to A&M, you kind of felt like their season was kind of done. It was a game that was a winnable game. It was a game that I feel like is a test to see, are you with the top dogs or are you a middle dog? And they were a middle dog, and then Rosen dealt with the shoulder injury or whatnot for the rest of the year. And he eventually shut it down. I like Rosen to have a huge year. I think this will be his coming out party. But I don't see this as being like a huge, winning team per se. I see them going 8-4. 9 returning starters on offense. I like that. 4 offensive linemen. Scott Quisenberry, probably their best offensive lineman. And then receivers, the receivers are kind of, I don't know too much about their guys. They're not, Jordan Lashley and Darren Andrews, not bad. 55 catches from Andrews, 709 yards, 4 touchdowns, 41 catches, 620 yards, 5 touchdowns for Lashley. Some good numbers from them last year. We'll see how they do this year. Soso Jamambo, a real good running back. I like the offense. The thing is about UCLA, it's not that they don't have a good offense, or it's not that they don't have prospects in a sense, it's just that they don't put it all together on the field. Defensively, Jacob Teodo Mariner, good defensive lineman, 46 tackles, 3 sacks last season. Kenny Young, linebacker, he's a senior this year, inside linebacker, 90 tackles last year, 5 sacks and a pick. Jalil Wadode, 76 tackles last year. He's in the secondary, their free safety. Watch him. Darius Pickett, 42 tackles, 3 picks last year, their strong safety. Watch out, freshman Darnay Holmes, real high prospect. He's a cornerback. Nathan Medors, 35 tackles in the secondary last year. Watch him. Kind of young at the linebackers other than Kenny Young. Defensive line-wise, got a couple returning starters, but other than that, like I said, 8-4. Surprisingly, I got Utah going 9-3. For me, Utah, it's never really about the players; it's the system. They've got a great system. They retool every year. They don't really have a lot of returning starters at all on this team, but I think they'll win some games that they're supposed to win. And then they might steal a couple. That one at BYU, I think, is a winnable game. It's early in the season. They have a young team, but I think they can win that one. And then they have some cakewalks, and then they have – wait, let me see here. Yeah, they have some winnable games. And then I have them actually slated to, after a bye week, beating Stanford at home. and then losing to USC. So starting 5-0, and then losing to USC, beating Arizona State at home, losing at Oregon, and then winning at UCLA, winning against UCLA at home, winning against Washington State at home. Losing at Colorado and winning against Colorado at home. It's not one of those things that necessarily like, oh, you're really high on Utah. Like, why are you so high on Utah? They really don't have that great of a team returning. But it's more about their scheduling, the way that they're really tough at home, the home games that they are gaining. I have them slated to lose most of the tough road games that they have, other than the BYU one. So it's just more of like scheduling. I got them going 9-3 this year. Defensive wise, it's a lot of hard names to say, but they're also some good talent. I'll butcher them. Lowell Ludaludi, a senior, brother with the other Ludaludi that's in the NFL. 28 tackles, 3.5 sacks last year. Filippo Mokofisi, he had 45 tackles and 5 sacks last year. Kyle Fitz is a senior. I'd watch out for him. He's a transfer from UCLA on the left end. And then Kavika Lufatasaga, a senior, 52 tackles last year. He's a real good linebacker that they have. And then Suina Tataoli, 57 tackles last year, and he also had a pick, another good linebacker. And then secondary-wise, they are young in the secondary-wise. They did pick up some good JUCO transfers in Jarick Lewis and Corian Ballard. But the main guys in the secondary is Chase Hansen, white boy. Good hitter out the secondary, 90 tackles, a sack, and 3 picks last year. He's just one of those playmakers. He's going to be, he reminds me a lot of I guess the comparison also because they're both white, but who's that damn – I can't think of his name right now. I'll think of it in a minute. Free safety for the Vikings. That's who he reminds me of. He played at Notre Dame. I'll think of his name in a minute. Harrison Smith. That's his name. That's who he reminds me of. And then Troy Williams is the quarterback for them. He was here last year, transferred from Washington. He didn't play necessarily awesome last year, but this is a team where the defense really, lets you have a lot of opportunities if you don't turn the ball over too much. He did turn the ball over a bit. He ran for 414 yards last year, threw for 2,757, 15 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. I look for him to have a pretty good year as long as he doesn't turn the ball over. And if he does, Cooper Bateman's waiting to take over, transfer from Alabama. Running back wise, they don't have Joe Williams anymore. Joe Williams was real good last year. Ahmad Shane and Zach Moss will both be back. They got to play a good amount last year. Both ran for about 400 yards, 6 touchdowns combined. And then wide receiver-wise, Damari Simpkins is a sophomore. He had 19 catches, 160 yards, and a touchdown last year. Their main guy is coming back at wide receivers, Raylon Singleton, 27 catches, 464 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's a pretty tall, go up and get it type receiver. And then offensive line-wise, they're only returning 1 offensive lineman, so that's tough. So the offense is definitely going to struggle, but to me, that's not something that's not unnormal with Utah. That Utah is always about their defense. Yeah, 9-3 is, I feel like a little bit of an overachieving if they were to get to 9-3, but I guess they're one of my surprises in the Pac-12. USC, I got USC winning it pretty handily. I don't really see another team, really messing with USC too much in the Pac-12 South. They're going to play 2 real tough games early in the year. They're going to have Stanford at home and they're going to have Texas at home. I like for them to win both those games. If there was a game that they were going to lose out of those 2, it would be the Stanford one. Just it being the first one, Stanford I would say is probably a better team than Texas. But all 3 of these teams Texas and Stanford are 2 teams that are talented, but chemistry is going to help them over the season. They'll be better at the end of the year than they are at the first of the year. USC is a team, though, I think they have enough talent across the board that they can win these early games because they have a little bit more talent than Stanford or Texas. and talent level is going to be real close on all of those. But also it's experience the last couple of years that, USC's been successful the last year or so. Stanford and Texas, they've been good, but they haven't necessarily been 10-3. Right there at the cusp of a playoff berth. So let's go with some. Talking about their defense, Cameron Smith, linebacker, 83 tackles, a sack last year, real good player. We'll see a lot of him this year. We've heard about him the last couple of years. He's gonna have a good year. Defensive line wise, Porter Gustin, 5.5 sacks, 68 tackles. Rashard Green, 55 tackles, 6 sacks last year. Uchenna Nwosu, 53 tackles. 3 sacks, and then holding it down in the secondary, Ahmad Marshall, one of the best cornerbacks in the country, and with him is sophomore Jack Jones, who's a real high prospect, and then Marvell Tell is another, the free safety, another good player that they're returning. He had 43 tackles and a pick last year. Marshall had 51 tackles and 3 interceptions. So a pretty good defense returning. They always have good prospects. They'll have, the top, second and third, like depth wise, they'll have the best prospects. But I mean, they have a really good team. And then offensively, 2 returning offensive linemen. The other guys, though, that they're high prospects that are on the offensive line. Daniel Amotor Hebe is the tight end. His brother's also on the team. He is a wide receiver, though. Michael Pittman, sophomore wide receiver, highly touted sophomore. Joseph Lewis, another highly touted freshman that should get some time this year. And then Dante Burnett is the top receiver, top returning guy too. 56 catches, 622 yards, 7 touchdowns. He's by far the most senior guy on the team. And then the big combo, probably second best combination that I can think of off the top of my head that I've been doing, when I've been doing these previews thus far of, a quarterback and running back combo. Sam Darnett and Ronald Jones is going to be a real tough combo to stop this year. Arnett is just one of those guys you're just like, how did he pull that off? How do you do that? He had a lot of good games last year. And he had a lot of good games and big games, I think, was the big thing with him. And they pulled off that game at the end of the season against Penn State. They've won, 9 games in a row. I look for them to continue the hot streak. I have them losing at Notre Dame. I think at that point in the year, Notre Dame's going to, your chemistry is going to be there. I have them losing to Notre Dame, and I have them losing at Colorado. I have Colorado returning the favor against them this year. After they beat Colorado last year, they were Colorado's only loss in the Pac-12 South last year. So they have to go into Colorado, so I have them losing that game. I have them finishing 10-2 on the season and then playing in the Pac-12 championship game against the winner of the North. And so to do the North, we'll do the shit teams first. And there's only one real shit team in here. It's Cal. Cal, I got them going 1-11, winning no FBS games. I have them winning their one game against Weber State. They play North Carolina and Mississippi in the preseason, and then they have, to me, they're the worst team in the Pac-12. Justin Wilcox's first year here, he was a D-back at Oregon. Think he was a defensive coordinator at somewhere. I can't remember where it was before this season. He'll eventually probably get it together, but this just isn't the year. It was already kind of in a sense. The defense is good, but offense, I feel like rebuilding when they losing Davis Webb and losing Chad Hansen last year. But they do have some good key some pieces on offense. We'll see what happens at they've got Ross Bowers, slated as the guy right now to be the quarterback, a sophomore. Trey Watson, he's a senior. He had 720 yards last year, 4 touchdowns. I look for him to have an all right year. Demetrius Robertson's probably their best player on offense, best NFL prospect. Really like him. He had 50 catches, 767 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. McQueen Stovall, another guy. Vic Wharton, transfer from Alabama or from Tennessee. And then they've got 2 returning offensive linemen, not great. And they've got a real good kicker in Matt Anderson, 22 of 26 last year. Watch him this year. Defensive line-wise, James Looney, real good. Cameron Staffel, Tony Macari, 3 good offensive linemen, or 3 good defensive linemen. That's probably honestly their strong suit to this team. Some other good linebackers, Raymond Davis and Devontae Downs. Downs had 84 tackles, 2 sacks last year. Davis had 69 tackles and an interception. Secondary-wise, Luke Rubenzer, their safety, had 58 tackles and 2 picks. Look for him. What I didn't say on the defensive line, Looney had 3.5 sacks, and then Saffel had 4 sacks last year. So good production from them too. I got them going 11-1. Oregon State to me, I think will have a better year than they've had in the past. It's Gary Anderson's 3rd year. Usually coaches usually hit the stride in their 3rd year. Best player for me on this team is Ryan Nall. I think he'll have a real good year. He had almost 1,000 yards last year, 13 touchdowns. He's a pretty powerful dude. Another thing, third person I like to watch for on the offense is they actually got transferred Thomas Tyner from Oregon. So we'll see if he gets some playing time this year. Hunter Jarman and Jordan Villeman are returning wide receivers. Seth Collins is another returning wide receiver. Collins is the leader, 36 receptions, 418 yards and a touchdown. Villeman, 21 catches, 253 yards and a touchdown. So we'll, see what they can do. That the quarterback position is a little up in the air. Jake Luton, transfer from Idaho, and then Daryl Garrettson and Marcus McMarion are other guys. Garrettson and McMarion were guys that were there last year. They obviously really weren't that great, and then so Luton's supposed to get the job, but we'll see if one of those guys can step up. 2 returning starters on the offensive line, and then defensively they've got 8 guys coming back on defense. Pretty solid at their most solid position is probably linebacker. Bright Wogby, 55 tackles, 5.5 sacks last year. Masas Hungalu, he had 83 tackles last year and a pick. Defensive line wise, Baker Pritchard did pretty good last year. He had 23 tackles, only a sack and a half though. He's a returning senior though. And then Xavier Crawford had 70 tackles, 10 passes blocked, a touchdown or an interception. He's a cornerback. And then Brandon Arnold, 68 tackles and a pick last year, another good cornerback for their defense. I got them going 6-6. Kind of, I feel like an up year for them. I have them beating Minnesota in at Colorado State in the preseason. And then surprise games on the year. Obviously, I have them beating California at California, beating Arizona at Arizona, beating Arizona State at home. I mean, I have them slated as better than the other teams in the Pac, those other 3 bad teams in the Pac-12. I mean, that's about it. And I mean, I got them going 6-6. So they'll be all right. And they may steal one from someone. I thought they may steal one from Oregon this year, but then it's at Oregon, and I didn't realize they beat. I mean, I knew they beat Oregon last year, but I forgot they beat Oregon last year by 10. When was the last time you heard about Oregon State beating Oregon? So, I mean, Oregon usually just knocks them just straight out of the water. I mean, sometimes it's close, but most of the time Oregon, just demolishes them. Okay, so Washington State, Luke Falk, best player on the offensive side of the ball. Huge NFL prospect. I really like Falk. He had four 4,468 yards, 38 touchdowns, 11 interceptions last year. They really struggled early in the year. They lost the Eastern Cooper Cup in Eastern Washington. At the first game of the year, they lost to Boise State by 3 in the second game of the year. They really got on a stride after that. I mean, I was thinking all year, man, what if they would have won those first 2 games? And what kind of season would we be looking at then? Dropped their last 2 against Colorado and Washington. I got them going 7-5 this year. I think they kind of, in a sense, a little bit overachieved during the stretch of the season. I think they probably took 2 games away from 2 teams that they probably should have lost. They lost 2 games that they should have won early in the year. That's kind of the way I look at it. But like I was saying, Luke Falk, best player. It's going to be about who he's going to be throwing to this year. Who's he going to be? Kyle Sweet is a guy who's also their punter, which is funny, but he's also a good receiver. He had 27 catches, 357 yards, and 3 touchdowns last year. I think we'll see a little bit of him this year. Sometimes I think the guy that he throws to, guys throw to more is, guys who they have chemistry with. He's a guy I know he's had chemistry with in the past. His top receiver, though, is Tavares Martin. He's a guy that he started to really find last year. Marks was his guy. But I think Martin will be his guy this year. 64 catches, 728 yards, 7 touchdowns. And then Isaiah Johnson-Mack, a sophomore. He was a freshman last year, a sophomore now. I think he could potentially have a pretty good year. There's a lot of guys that's going to catch a lot of balls this year. Running back wise, they got 3 guys, 3-headed monster at running back. Jonathan Williams, Jamal Morrow, and Gerald Wicks, all good players. I think Williams is probably the best runner. Also the best catcher out of the backfield. Morrow is the best catcher out of the backfield, and then Wicks is kind of the guy that's kind of around the end zone the most. But they all 3 play. They're all 3 going to play a good amount. Offensive line-wise, returning 3 starters. Cody O'Connell's their best offensive lineman, I'd say. Defensive-wise, returning 9 guys on defense. This is something I do like about this team, the amount of starters they're returning on defense. Hercules Mataf. On defensive line, he's kind of their guy that leads the defensive line, 47 tackles, 5 sacks. And then Peyton Puller, he's a senior this year, 93 tackles last year and a sack. Darren Moulton, a guy in the secondary, 71 tackles. Their secondary is real strong, I'd say. Robert Taylor, another guy, 61 tackles last year. Jalen Thompson, 51 tackles last year. Marcellus Pippins, 27 tackles and 2 interceptions. Not bad. Nanambi Agalio had 4 sacks last year, 39 tackles. Watch him on the defensive line. Isaac Dotson is another good linebacker for them, 64 tackles, 2 picks. But I got them going 7-5. Like I said, I think they had a little bit overachieved last year. I got them, winning the games they should win, and I have them losing the games they should lose. Early in the year, they do play Boise State and Oregon State at home. I think these are games that they need to win. They're both at home, like I was saying. And they have USC at home in a couple weeks after that. So, we'll see how that sets up. Oregon. I got Oregon having a real good year. 4-8 last year. Lost, a couple close games here and there. I really like the play out of Justin Herbert. I think he's going to be a real stud for them. He really showed a lot of promise once they let him start playing. 1,936 yards, 19 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's pretty good at running the ball also, 273 yards, 2 touchdowns. He didn't play the whole year. Royce Freeman's back. I think that's real big that they got him back. Tony Brooks-Jones, a good little flex type running back out of the backfield type guy. He had 790 yards last year on 9 touchdowns. Freeman, he was hurt a bit last year, 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns too. Taj Griffin, another guy that's pretty good. He's back. Receiver-wise, Charles Nelson is a real good, slot type guy. 52 catches, 554 yards, 5 touchdowns. Darren Carrington, another real good receiver, 43 catches, 606 yards, 5 touchdowns. I see both of them having pretty good years. Watch out for sophomore Dylan Mitchell. And then uh, Jacob Breland's the sophomore tight end. The returning four offensive linemen. I really like that. And then defensively, a little bit. They have a lot of guys that they play a lot of different guys. There's secondary wise, they have about six or seven guys that they play. Free safety wise, Khalil Oliver, and Tyree Robinson. Both those guys got to play a lot. Both free safeties. Devin Schooler, and they got a freshman coming in, Demore Lenore. He's supposed to get some playing time at the strong safety position this year, but Brennan Schuler played that position last year, had 74 tackles and 4 picks. Tyree Robinson had 54 tackles and a pick last year. Oliver had 46 tackles and a pick last year. Hugo Amadi, another guy in the secondary, 42 tackles last year. Arion Springs, 39 tackles last year, 12 passes blocked. Let's see here. Thomas Graham, he's a freshman. He's supposed to be pretty good. So they're getting like a lot of good prospects too, with the good amount of returning starters that they have. 17 returning starters, 8 on offense, 9 on defense. AJ Hodgkins is a linebacker that's returning. Akulanu Apelu, and then Troy Dye is their best player that's returning. He had 91 tackles, 6.5 sacks, a pick last year. Real good player for them. And then they do struggle a bit on the defensive line, but they do have some guys that are coming back that did play last year. Justin Hollins, 3 sacks, 51 tackles, is probably their best returning guy on the defensive line. I got them going 9-3. First of the year they played Nebraska at home. I think that's going to be a good game to build off of. At Wyoming, don't take that game lightly. Wyoming's a good team. I hope they're ready for that one. And then, I think they kind of cakewalk at first, but then they have a real tough road. They play Washington State, at Stanford, at UCLA, Utah at home, and then at Washington, all back to back to back. I think that's going to be their stretch. That's really going to define their season. I got them losing 2 out of the 3, or 2 out of the 5. And then I have them winning the last 2 games at home against Arizona and Oregon State. Got them going 9-3 though. Stanford's my next team on here. I really think this team is going to be one of those teams that really builds as the season goes on, and they're going to be one of those teams that, like, we're talking about next year being really good. The only problem that I have, though, is the quarterback position. I don't like Killer Christ. He really hadn't been good in the past. And then, Ryan Burns takes over for him, and he looks like dog shit too. So, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe Burns was the guy last year and he looked like dog shit, and then Christ took over. But both guys really aren't that great. I'm not high on either of them. Well, thank God for both of them that, they got 4 offensive linemen returning for them, and then, they run the ball a lot. Bryce Love is going to, just fill the spot that McCaffrey was. He's not going to be what McCaffrey was, but he's going to fill the spot the void, I would say, pretty well. 811 yards last year, 3 touchdowns. He's got good experience with McCaffrey's injuries in the past, and the fact that they do run the ball a lot. So, Love did get good playing time. There'll be a guy behind him, Trevor Springs and Cameron Scarlett, that'll get playing time too. Wide receiver-wise, they're kind of weak. If Trenton Irwin's your top receiver coming back, I think that's a little bit weak. Dalton Schultz, a good tight end, and then JJ Arcega-Whiteside, another wide receiver that's returning. Not terrible. They're always bringing in real good tight ends. Caden Smith is another good tight end that they have. And then defensively, they're real stout on defense all the time. Some of the best linebackers in the nation, Peter Columbali, Bobby Orenik, and then Kevin Palma, Colombier, butchered the fuck out of his name. 45 tackles, 3.5 sacks last year. Okarike, 41 tackles last year, and Palma had 40 tackles last year. Uh, some guys in the secondary, Justin Reed, 57 tackles, brother of the Reed that's in the NFL. Um, and then Joey Alfieri, he's actually a linebacker. He had 51 tackles, 5 sacks last year, 2 picks. Pretty good player. Harrison Phillips is on the defensive line, 46 tackles, 46 tackles, 6.5 sacks last year. And then Almeen Murphy had 36 tackles. He's in the secondary. Is that right? Yeah, he's in the secondary. Yeah, and then Quentin Meeks is another guy in the secondary to watch. I mean, I like this team to be better than most of the teams in the North, but I don't think they're necessarily going to be the best team in the North. I have them. Let me see here. Yeah, I have them. I actually have them at the end of the season. I have them winning against Washington late in the year. I have them winning against Notre Dame late in the year. Obviously, 2 home games. Like I said, I think this is a team that's going to struggle at the first year, and they're going to figure it out. 2 losses I have on the schedule at Utah, and then at UCLA or at USC. But other than that, I got them going 10-2, and having a pretty solid season. They've been 10-2. They're 10-2 last year, or I guess they're 9-3 last year. And then bowl game got to 10-3. Similar year to last year. Win most of their games, lose a couple of them. Pretty good year, I think. All right, so Washington Huskies, I got them winning the Pac-12 North. I got them going 11-1, playing USC in the championship game. I think it's going to be a hell of a game. I think basically this game's going to decide who's going to get the 4th spot in the playoff. Whoever wins it, it's basically Washington or USC that's going to get in. I got this team, doing exactly what they did at the first of last year. They're going to slaughter their opponents the first of the year. They're playing a bunch of garbage teams in the preseason. Real tough game, though, on September 23rd at Colorado. I think this is a game where both teams will be, at a point where they're both probably 3-0. They're both feeling good about themselves. Their coaches have been selling, you're better than the other team, you know what I mean? And I think this is a game that's going to be tough, but I think they're going to go out and I think they're going to beat Colorado. I think they're going to cruise the next couple of weeks at Oregon State, Colorado, at Arizona State. They're going to get a bye week, recollect themselves, have UCLA at home, have Oregon at home. I think 2 games that they win. And then I think they lose at Stanford. Real tough game at Stanford. I think Stanford's going to get the better of them this year. Everybody was worried about Stanford last year on their schedule. That was their first real tough game, and they slaughtered them. I think this year it's going to be something on Stanford's schedule. They're going to want to beat Washington at home. Washington's always had issues with Stanford in the past before last season, and then the last 3 seasons before that, I'll say. And then I have them beating Utah at home, and then beating Washington State at home. I got them going 11-1 on the year, like I said, facing USC. So let's talk about their team a little bit. Real tough defensive line in Greg Gaines and Vita Vea. Vita Vea had 39 tackles, 5 sacks last year. He's a top NFL prospect. Greg Gaines, another top NFL prospect, 35 tackles, 3.5 sacks. Greg Gaines is just a big boy. You'll see him. He's big white boy number 99. He's one of my favorite guys to watch. Keyshawn Briere was one of their top players last year. 70 tackles, 2 sacks. Really like him. I think he's going to have a monster year. Azim Vicker got hurt late in the year last year. This guy was a real key on the defense. 67 tackles. I really like him. And then secondary-wise, JoJo McIntosh is back. JoJo McIntosh had 67 tackles last year. And then Taylor Rapp. Taylor Rapp was a freshman last year, and he showed a lot of promise. He got 53 tackles, 4 picks last year. I think he's going to have a real solid year. Watch out for a redshirt freshman, Byron Murphy. He's a cornerback. This is a team I've always liked Washington, but I I like their team a lot this year. I liked their team a lot last year, after they started hot. And they were kind of my team that I kind of rode with for most of the year last year. I love how, Jake Browning throws the ball. He throws a real pretty ball. I do like this team. But I don't see them getting past USC. Let me talk about their offense first. Myles Gaskin, real good running back. I like Lavon Coleman too. Lavon Coleman, he was a key in the Pac-12 championship game last year. Receiver wise, they're not getting they don't bring John Ross back, but Dante Pettis had a real good year last year. 53 catches, 822 yards, 15 touchdowns. Chico McClatcher, 31 catches, 574 yards, and 5 touchdowns. A real good slot guy. We'll see what he does this year. Quentin Pounds is a sophomore who's coming in. We'll see if he can help out the receiving core also. Drew Samples back. Offensive line-wise, returning 3 guys. Trey Adams is probably the best offensive lineman. And Jake Browning, I talked a little bit about Jake Browning. Obviously, NFL prospect. I really like him. Washington, USC. I think USC wins the Pac-12 championship game. USC. I think this is their year to get to the playoff. And I like them winning the Pac-12 this year.